School books and haunted nooks presented by Absolutely Haunted. We've all heard whispers of haunted schools, dark halls echoing with footsteps that shouldn't be there, laughter drifting from empty classrooms. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. If you'd asked me before, I would have called myself a skeptic without hesitation. But that was before I stepped into one of those schools, before I met the things that still linger there. Wallace, my wife, debated for days about attending her 20th high school reunion. Knowing I'm not a fan of these events, especially since I skipped my own, she hesitated to ask me. But when she finally did, I agreed to go and support her. A month later, we packed our bags and flew to her hometown. Night fell before we knew it, and to my surprise, I felt a flicker of excitement. I was finally going to meet the people who had loomed so large in my wife's high school stories. As we stepped through the doors and into the dimly lit gym, a strange unease crawled over me, but I brushed it off. The reunion was a success, packed with old classmates lost in nostalgia. I sat back, listening as they laughed and reminisced, the air thick with memories. But as the night wore on, something felt off. Maybe it was just the way the shadows pooled in the corners or how some faces seemed almost too pale under the flickering lights. Still, I played along, even chuckling at a few stories about my wife I never would have known, though, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that not everyone in that room was there for the reunion. I reached out, taking Wallace's arm, and let her know I was going to slip off to the restroom and would return soon. She turned questionably and wanted to know if I wanted her to show me where it is. I looked at all the faces surrounding her, looking at me expectantly. "No, darling, just point the way, you stay and reminisce, I'll be fine." She gave me a look that said, "I don't know about that." Which caused me to laugh. "Really, I will be okay." I walked away smiling. I made my way out into the hallway where I had been told to go. Truth was, it felt good to leave a little bit of the chatter behind me. I walked past the office as I had been directed and found myself looking at this huge line for the restroom. I glanced to my left, thinking that surely there was a second restroom just up the flight of stairs I saw. I took them two at a time, coming out of the stairwell onto a huge, massively long hallway. Lockers lined one side all the way to the end. From the moment I stepped away from the crowd, a wave of sickness crashed over me. In truth, the feeling had been there since I first walked through those towering double doors, but I had pushed it down, not wanting to ruin the night for Wallace. Now, alone in the dimly lit hallway on the second floor, my stomach twisted violently, knots tightening like something inside me was recoiling. A cold sweat slicked my skin. I needed to find a restroom, fast. The longer I stayed in that hallway, the worse it got. The air felt thick, almost heavy, as if something unseen pressed against me. As I hurried forward, the overhead lights flickered, casting shifting shadows along the walls. Every door I passed seemed slightly ajar, gaping into darkness. I could swear I heard faint whispers, just beyond the edge of my hearing. My pulse pounded as I quickened my pace, the unsettling sense growing that I wasn't walking toward safety, I was walking straight into something waiting for me. I had traveled about 10 foot down the massive hallway, past the first set of lockers, when I spotted it, the small sign indicating men. I slipped inside quickly, finding that the lights were off. I felt around the wall until I found the switch. Flicking it up with my finger, the room was bathed in some pretty poor lighting, but enough to do what I had come to do. I stumbled into a stall, barely shutting the door before my stomach lurched violently. I barely had time to brace myself before everything I had eaten came rushing out. My body trembled, cold sweat beading on my forehead. Maybe I was sicker than I thought. A wave of dizziness hit, forcing me to sink onto the toilet, head in my hands, waiting for the world to steady. The nausea ebbed slowly, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness in my gut. But just as relief began to creep in, the silence shattered. The sharp squeak of a faucet turning echoed through the empty restroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of hands being washed. My breath hitched. I hadn't heard anyone come in. For a moment, I sat frozen, heart hammering. I shook my head. Why was I so paranoid? I felt frightened, and this was not me. Despite my discomfort, I managed a weak grin. Someone else must have climbed the stairs to escape the endless line downstairs. Strange, though, that I hadn't heard them enter. Then again, I had been a little preoccupied. If they had witnessed my misery, I'd owe them an apology. Steadying myself, I pushed the cold metal stall door open. I froze. The faucet was on, water gushing down the drain, but the room was empty. My stomach twisted, not from sickness this time, but something deeper, more primal. Had they left? I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard footsteps. And yet, a biting chill now clung to the air, creeping over my skin. I swallowed hard, suddenly desperate to leave. But my body betrayed me, still weak, still unsteady. I needed just a moment more. Just long enough to catch my breath. Just long enough to ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel them. I scrubbed my hands, splashing cold water onto my face, the icy sting grounding me. My stomach had settled, at least enough to move, but an uneasy feeling still clung to me like a second skin. Stepping back into the hallway, I hesitated. Had it always been this long? The corridor stretched endlessly, the dim overhead lights barely piercing the shadows. Lockers and closed classroom doors lined one side, their surfaces dull and lifeless. The other side was nothing but towering windows, revealing the parking lot bathed in eerie, flickering light. The air felt heavier out here, thick with something I couldn't name. I swallowed hard, forcing myself forward, each step echoing louder than it should. Just get to the stairwell. Just don't look too hard at the darkened windows. Whatever you do, don't stop. My fear was out of control and for no reason I could tell, yet still my skin crawled. I never made it to the stairs. I was stopped dead in my tracks by the feeling that not only was I not alone, but the hair rising on my arms told me something was wrong. I could feel eyes burning into me from behind me. I suddenly turned and looked back, and what I saw, I will never forget. At the end of the impossibly long hallway, against the wall that ended anyone's quest to follow the hall any further, stood 5 people. Well, not people I should say, as I have never seen a real human see through and wavering slightly. It took me only moments to realize they were teenagers. They were staring directly at me with a little bit of curiosity, and at the same time you could tell they were slightly disinterested in me. That is until they realized that I could see them. What probably gave me away was the double take, the classic blink, squint, and lean in combo. I hadn't meant to be obvious, but, well, they weren't exactly normal. The girl in the white sweater nudged the guy in the leather jacket with her elbow, eyes wide. "He can see us," she whispered, like I was some kind of rare, exotic creature. The guy turned to me fully, his grin slow and easy, the kind that belonged in an old-school movie star. James Dean comes to mind. "So he can," he said, flashing perfect teeth. His grin widened just a little too much. "So he can." I took them in, every unsettling detail. Their clothes were all wrong. Straight out of the 1950s, not the present. The 2 girls wore crisp button-down shirts tucked into long pencil skirts, their high ponytails bouncing slightly as they shifted. The 3 guys were variations of the same theme: leather jackets, cuffed jeans, polished shoes. At first glance, they could have passed for a group of reunion guests dressed for a nostalgic throwback. But they weren't. My breath caught in my throat. They were translucent, not in a trick of the light way, but in a way that made my stomach churn. I could see the lockers behind them, hazy and distorted, as if I were looking through a warped glass pane. Panic clawed at my mind as I searched desperately for an explanation. Maybe this was part of the reunion? A themed performance, a gimmick? But my memory came up empty. No one had mentioned anything like this. And deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't a show. They weren't supposed to be here. A cold, unnatural breeze swept through the hallway, seemingly from nowhere, and it slithered up my spine like ice-cold fingers. It was then, in that gut-wrenching moment, that the reality of what I was seeing slammed into me. What I was witnessing was impossible. I gasped, a breath caught in my throat, as the lockers, those dull, lifeless lockers, began to move. Without warning, the doors flew open and slammed shut, the noise deafening, relentless. Books hurled from within, hitting the windows opposite and falling to the floor, only to float back up into the air and return to the locker's depths. The books would then repeat the whole process again and again. A sharp, metallic rhythm echoed through the hall, pounding against my skull. And then, as if some unseen force had seized them, the entire row of lockers began to rock violently back and forth, creaking and groaning, as if they were alive, like they were trying to escape. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, the hallway felt suffocating, the walls closing in as the lockers rattled and clattered, their shaking growing more violent with each passing second. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, they fell silent, still, almost like it never happened. I knew I needed to move, but I could not convince my feet of that as they were currently bolted to the floor. I could feel my fear levels rising when I realized I could not get my legs to do my bidding. The blonde girl let out an amused laugh that traveled to my ears in seconds. As I watched, she slowly brought her hand up and gave me just the smallest of waves, fingers only. It was a cute gesture, but coming from her, for some reason, it felt like a threat. The guy she had addressed earlier got an annoyed look on his face. He reached out, grabbed her fingers and forced them down to her sides. He then jerked her toward the locker next to him, and they passed through and was gone. The other female looked at me and smiled a coy smile before following the other blonde and the movie star guy. The last two males, whooping and howling like animals, followed behind her, and they were gone. Suddenly, I could move again, and I didn't hesitate. I turned and bolted toward the stairs, desperate to escape, but the moment my foot hit the first step, my path was blocked. A small, balding man stood on the landing, wearing a crisp white lab coat. His smile was wide, unsettling, his eyes fixed on me with an almost knowing glint. He looked solid, well, far more solid than the others. But even as I stared at him, I could feel it. He was no different. He was made of the same unnatural stuff, the same hollow, wrong essence that made the others shimmer and distort. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't fear alone that kept me rooted to the spot. No, it was the way his smile stretched even further, as if he could read the terror coursing through my mind. And then he spoke, his voice like a whisper crawling through my skull. "You're thinking of running, aren't you?" I didn't say a word. I couldn't, but somehow, he knew. He knew everything. Yes, you're right," he said, his voice smooth and insidious, curling around my thoughts. "Those kids and I, we're all stuck in the same place, forever bound to these cursed walls." My stomach twisted in horror as he floated closer, hovering just feet away, his presence suffocating. He pointed down the hallway with unnerving calm. "Would you like to see my classroom? It's just down there, at the end of the hall." I wanted to scream, to run. But all I could think to say was, "No thanks." My thoughts screamed to get out of here. I was desperate to push him away, but it didn't matter. I was so scared I could not make my legs work. With a slow, deliberate movement, he turned his head toward the faint light spilling in from the parking lot. And that's when I saw it. The side of his face was a ruin. No, more than that. It was like he had been caught in an explosion. His skin hung in tatters, raw and twisted, exposing the jagged bone beneath as if he'd been ripped apart by something far worse than death. The sight was so horrifying, so incomprehensible, that my breath caught in my throat. His grin widened. He didn't need to speak. He knew what I was thinking. That was it. Something in my fear broke, and my legs were mine to control again. I bolted past the specter and went down the stairs faster than I had come up them. One would have thought that I had wings on my feet, I was moving so fast. I am lucky I did not break my neck and become one with my unwanted friends. I went straight through the double gym doors and quickly back to our table. I rushed in so quickly that it cued my ever-observant wife to the fact that I was in some sort of distress. Everyone at the table was still enjoying their time together. Wallace turned a concerned eye in my direction. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. She reached out and grasped my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze, while simultaneously pulling me back down into my chair. She leaned over and whispered, "Jensen, are you okay? You look awful." The concern on her face showed her love for me. I just didn't want to make a big deal out of what happened to me in front of all of these strangers. I explained to Wallace that I had gotten sick. I wiped the sweat that was pooling off my forehead for emphasis. "We can go then, babe." She looked at her friends with regret. I knew no matter how badly she wanted to stay, she would get up and follow me out the door, cause that is the kind of thing we did for one another, and I was not going to have that tonight. But after what I had saw, I had no desire to stay in this building any longer. I looked at the people gazing back at me and asked, "Can anyone bring Wallace back to the hotel if I go? I think I am coming down with something. That way she can stay and have a good time tonight." Several hands went up and Wallace said, "Are you sure?" "Yes. Stay, have fun. You do not ever get to see these people." "You know I will be fine." I muttered a quick apology, kissed my wife on the forehead, and bolted out into the hallway, desperate to find the double doors I'd come through earlier. But the moment I stepped into the corridor, something felt dangerous. I turned down one hall, then another, and another, but the layout of the school seemed to shift with every step. I was lost in a place that felt too big, too suffocating. 15 minutes passed, but it felt like hours. I had to get out. The walls were pressing in, the air thick with something heavy, suffocating. A strange, crushing pressure wrapped around me, growing tighter with every step, almost unbearable now, like I was about to be crushed. Worst of all, I could feel something. Something was following me. I could hear its footsteps. Every time I turned to look over my shoulder, there were strange shadows that would dart behind things, like it was hoping I would convince myself I was imagining them. But I could feel it. It was so close, so close. I had to get out. I found the doors finally and rushed through them to the outside. The minute I cleared the red brick building, I felt hit by a cooling breeze, which rushed over me, immediately reducing my distress. I made it to the rental car and unlocked the door. Sliding into the driver's seat, I sat there for a few moments and immediately realized that I was no longer feeling sick. Matter of fact, I now felt like I did when I left the hotel this evening. The feeling of being stalked by something had also dissipated pretty much from the moment my foot hit the concrete parking lot. I sat there trying to gather all of my senses before I drove out into traffic. A moment of lunacy hit me long enough for me to think maybe I should go back in, but the thought of doing that was beyond my abilities. I was that shaken. Once I glanced back at the building, I knew that would not be taking place. Up on the third floor where I had not been, I could see a circular glowing green light moving from window to window. That was enough for me. I backed out and drove away. This place was way too weird for me. Hours later, Wallace arrived back at the hotel and found me crashed out asleep in bed. She asked me if I was better, and I told her about all of the things I had witnessed last night. She gave me a look I could not quite read. I blurted out, "I know how it sounds. I am quite aware I sound insane." She reached out and stopped my tirade. "Jensen," squeezing my arm, she added, "Babe, my school is haunted." "What?" I was flabbergasted. "You never told me that." I was looking at her with an accusing expression. "I know," as I could feel it on my face and could do nothing to wipe the look off. "I know, Jensen, but you don't believe in the paranormal." I gave her a look. "I do now," I exclaimed. She laughed. "Don't laugh too much," I said. "Next reunion, you're on your own."